3 months before September 11th, a report was ignored. It named Al-Qaeda. It described aircraft in New York. The report was filed away. No actions were taken. This wasn't a fluke. It was just one of 14 distinct warnings that hit the desks of decision-makers in the months before 9/11. 14 moments where the red lights were flashing, the sirens were wailing, and the vast system simply chose to hit the snooze button. This is the story of analysts who saw it coming, field agents who tried to stop it, and a bureaucracy that failed them. The 9/11 Commission report, released in 2004, is one of the most exhaustive investigations into an intelligence failure in history. Its famous conclusion, a failure of imagination. But as we dive in, we see it wasn't about imagination at all. It was a failure of communication, a labyrinth of red tape, and institutional arrogance that ignored data which didn't fit the framework. Let's look at Warning 1, the Hart-Rudman Commission. This wasn't a fringe group. This was a government-mandated commission studying national security vulnerabilities. Senators Gary Hart and Warren Rudman spent 3 years studying American security. Their conclusion was published in a prophetic final report. A direct attack against American citizens on American soil is likely. The threat will come from conventional explosives delivered by aircraft. Published 8 months before 9/11. Yet the Bush administration disbanded the commission's follow-up task force in May 2001. A massive missed opportunity. Senator Hart later told reporters, "I've never been so frustrated in my life." He saw the gap and pointed directly at it. Then we have Warning 2, Richard Clarke. As the counterterrorism coordinator, he saw the Al-Qaeda threat as a blinking, urgent neon sign. In January 2001, he sent an urgent memo to National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, requesting an immediate top-level meeting on Al-Qaeda. That meeting didn't happen in February, June, or August. It finally took place on September 4th, 2001, just 7 days before the attacks. Clarke's later apology to the families was a rare moment of accountability. "Your government failed you," he said, and he was right. By midsummer, signals moved from strategy to tactics. This brings us to Warning 3, the Phoenix Memo, written by Agent Kenneth Williams. Williams noticed a surge of Middle Eastern men enrolling in flight schools. He recommended a nationwide investigation. The FBI headquarters chose silence. 36 days before the attacks, President Bush received Warning 4, the August 6th briefing. The title was clear and chillingly specific. It mentioned Al-Qaeda's interest in hijacking planes and surveillance of New York buildings. Officials later called it historical context. It wasn't. Perhaps the most heartbreaking what-if is Warning 5. The arrest of Zacarias Moussaoui on August 15th in Minneapolis for suspicious behavior. He wanted to fly a 747 but didn't care about taking off or landing. It was the ultimate smoking gun for analysts. Agents begged for a warrant to search his laptop. FBI headquarters blocked them, citing legal technicalities. They said there wasn't enough probable cause. When that laptop was finally opened after 9/11, it contained data that many believe could have unraveled the entire terrorist plot. How does a multi-billion-dollar system ignore 14 alarms? The first reason was the wall, a legal barrier preventing agencies from talking. Dr. Richard Betts put it best. Intelligence failures are almost never about a lack of information. They are tragic failures of human attention. By 2001, warnings had become background noise. If you hear the sky is falling every day, you eventually just stop looking up. The government had wargamed these scenarios before, but they treated it like a movie script, something technically possible, but practically very unlikely. For the enemy, the unthinkable was the plan. While officials analyzed theories, the hijackers were busy conducting their final rehearsals in plain sight. The wall between agencies was demolished by the Patriot Act just 45 days after the attacks, a solution implemented only after the tragedy. The Department of Homeland Security was finally built to ensure the dots would always be connected, exactly what Hart and Rudman suggested years earlier. But for the analysts who wrote those 14 warnings, the after was a cold comfort. They had done their jobs and saw the pattern. The 9/11 Commission called it a failure of imagination. Richard Clarke called it a failure of leadership. The evidence, however, points to something simpler. They did everything right, but the people at the top just weren't listening. The signals were loud, but the ears were closed. Today, those documents are declassified. You can read them yourself. You can see the dates, the names, and the specific warnings that were ignored. It leads to a question that official reports don't touch. Was this just bureaucratic friction? Or did someone consciously choose to ignore the noise? The record is there. The evidence is public. The 14 warnings stand as a testament to what happens when intelligence meets an immovable system. Was September 11th a tragedy that could have been stopped with a single phone call? Or was the system already too broken to save itself? The second issue was institutional inertia. By 2001, the CIA's Counterterrorism Center had been screaming about bin Laden for 5 years. But in the halls of power, those warnings had become background noise. It's a psychological phenomenon. If you hear the sky is falling every day, and it doesn't fall, you eventually stop looking up. The system became desensitized to the very danger it was built to prevent. Third, there was a failure of internalization. The government had wargamed the idea of a plane being flown into a building before. They had even thought about it during the 1996 Olympics. But they treated it as a movie script scenario, technically possible but unlikely. They didn't realize that for the enemy, the unthinkable was actually the plan. The gap between analysis and reality was growing every day. As Dr. Richard Betts of Columbia University put it, intelligence failures are almost never about a lack of information. They are failures of attention. We have more data than we know what to do with. The challenge isn't finding the needle, it's realizing that it matters. In the years following the tragedy, the what-ifs became a permanent part of the national record. The documents speak of ignored truths. The Hart-Rudman report was finally taken seriously. After the fact, Richard Clarke's warnings were validated, but only after the world had changed. The wall between agencies was demolished by the Patriot Act just 45 days after the attacks, a barrier removed far too late. The Department of Homeland Security was built to ensure the dots would always be connected, exactly what was suggested and then ignored earlier. But for the analysts who wrote those 14 warnings, the after was a cold comfort. They had done their jobs perfectly. They had seen the pattern. They had sounded the alarm. They did everything they could to prevent the day that changed everything. The 9/11 Commission called it a failure of imagination. Richard Clarke called it a failure of leadership. But the truth is simpler. They did everything right, but the people at the top just weren't listening. The warnings were loud, but the system remained deaf. Today, those documents are declassified. You can read them yourself. You can see the dates, the names, and the specific ignored warnings. It leads to a question that the official reports don't fully answer. Was this just the inevitable friction of a massive bureaucracy? Or were there specific people in specific offices who made a conscious choice to ignore the noise for political or personal reasons? The record is public. The evidence is there. The 14 warnings stand as a testament to a system that broke when it mattered. Was September 11th a tragedy that could have been stopped with a single phone call? Or was the system already too broken to save? The 9/11 Commission report doesn't have all the answers. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones left between the lines. The people who saw it coming did their part. They spoke, they wrote, they warned. But the system had its own plans. What happens next time? Are we better at listening now, or are we just generating more noise for the next failure of attention? The history of 9/11 is not just about what the terrorists did. It's about what the people in power chose not to do. 14 warnings, 14 chances to change the course of history. All of them missed, all of them documented, all of them public. We look back not to blame, but to learn. Because the cost of not listening is a price no one should ever pay again. Think about the analysts today. The ones whose reports are landing on desks right now. Are we making the same mistakes again? What do you think really happened? Was it just a broken system or a conscious choice? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. The documents are there. The record is public. The rest is up to you to decide. Knowledge is the only way to prevent history. Thanks for joining us for this investigation. Subscribe to Amazing Nearby for more deep dives into the stories hiding in plain sight.